Thank you, Christopher, and also thank you very much to Sanne for inviting me here today to come and celebrate this 20 years anniversary. I look really forward to this. And as you can see on the title, and as Christopher just said, I will focus on showing you some results on effects of transportation noise on our health. And you can say noise is a sound's unwanted cousin. So noise is defined as sound that are considered annoying and as something new or harmful to our health. So before starting, I would like to ask how many in here are actually annoyed by noise from traffic at their address at home? Just raise your hands. Okay, so that's actually a large part. Normally there's one or two raising their hands, but this is much more. It seemed like being 20%, and this is what EU calculates. So in the EU, every fifth year, every countries have to deliver in noise estimation, and in this estimation, EU at their last report said that at least 20% are exposed to more than 55 decibel, which is their guidance limit. But it's also said in the report that this is likely to be underestimated. And you can see in Denmark also we find much more people. We find 28, or the Danish EPA find 28% that are exposed to more than 58 decibel, which is the Danish guidance limit, which is a bit higher than in EU. And this is important to remember that we have so many people exposed, which means that the risk estimates I will show you later, they are rather small, but even with small risk estimate, we will see many additional diseases because so many people are actually exposed to high levels of noise. So how can noise at all be harmful? We think that there are two main mechanisms that are important here. First of all, we know that if you're exposed to acute noise, so kind of a high noise, for example, from traffic, this will activate the stress response where our body mobilizes resources to either flee or fight from a situation that we consider as harmful. And you can say this actually ensured our survival. So if we kind of met one of these and it made a sound, we had to react really fast. But you can say in our model society where we have much more noises all along, it's not, this can give problems because we know that a continuous activation of this stress response may be harmful to our health. What we think is at least as important is the effects of noise during nighttime, which we know actually disturbs our sleep, both what we call the slow wave sleep, which is the deepest sleep. We know that if you're exposed to noise, you have spent less time in this slow wave sleep, which is really, really important for our bodies. We know that this is where the body restores, so not having enough of this slow wave sleep is for sure problematic. We also know it reduces the time we spend in REM sleep, also really problematic. So of course it's not a problem if you sleep noisy one night. What we think is a huge problem here is the chronic exposure. So if you are exposed to noise from traffic chronically, if you for example live close to a road, we know that this chronic exposure to noise may lead to an increase in a number of biological risk factors. Where we started in the field was to look at the cardiovascular risk factors, which makes sense because this stress response goes in and affect a lot of cardiovascular factors. So what we know now also from animal studies, from experimental studies, is that if you are exposed to noise, you will have a higher risk for hypertension, oxidative stress, the endothelial dysfunctions, which is kind of the function of the small blood vessels. We also see an increase in inflammation. All of them are important risk factors for cardiovascular disease. We also know that especially sleep, if we know from a number of sleep studies, not maybe in relation to noise, but just if you sleep poorly, we know that you have a higher risk of diabetes. We've known that for many years. We know that sleep is associated with the decrease in insulin level, increase in blood glucose, and it also affects the hormones that are actually controlling our appetite. All risk factors for both obesity and diabetes. Then I work at the Danish Cancer Society, so I'm also really interested in looking at effects on cancer. And if we look at these mechanisms with stress and sleep, we also think that it's likely that there might be an effect on cancer. First of all, I think everybody in here know that if you have a night where you sleep poorly, if you're stressed, you change your lifestyle habits. If you had a poor sleep, it's much more difficult, at least for me, to do exercise. Also, you need to change, sometimes you change your dietary habits. And all of these are risk factors for cancer. We also, some of the same risk factors that applied for the other are also risk factors for cancer. And again, some of the same risk factors are in play here, which are risk factors for dementia, which we also have looked on. So what do we know about noise and health? When we started the study that I will show you a number of results from later, this was what we knew. We had just received these noise guidelines from WHO in 2018. And in this report, all you can say a number of experts within this field of epidemiology and noise had evaluated all the literature that were there. But they only, it took 3 years for them to actually do the report, so they only evaluated all the research until 2015. And what they concluded was that there were only enough evidence to conclude that there was an association between road traffic noise and ischemic heart disease. For all other diseases, they concluded that there were not enough evidence. It's not that they concluded that there wasn't an association. It's just that they concluded we definitely need more evidence before we can conclude for all the other diseases. So you can say this was on this basis that we started the study. I will show you some results from. And in this study, we used the entire Danish population, like also is the case in Sweden. We have this access to all our registries, which is kind of a Nordic thing. So basically nobody else than Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland has this possibility of doing research like this. So all people living in Denmark, we focused on people that were more than 30 years of age because we wanted to look at diseases that you get relatively late in life. We then looked in the period between 2000 to 2017 to see who actually developed the diseases we want to investigate. This gave us a population on 4 million persons. And in Denmark, everybody has this social security card. We get it at birth. And in this card, we have a 10-digit number, which enable us to link all our registries. So a registry that is very important is this CPR registry, where we have information on all addresses for the entire Danish population dating back to 1970. So for everybody living in Denmark, we established their address history until 2017. All these addresses were geocoded. They were sent to a noise consultant, which estimated exposure to road traffic noise at all these addresses. We also estimated air pollution. I won't go into details to that, but just to say we estimated high quality air pollution. So all the results you will see are adjusted for air pollution. Then we use our health registry to find out who actually got the disease. So for example, a really important registry is this hospital registry, where everybody who goes to hospital, both inpatients and outpatients, are registered with a diagnosis. And then we also have a number of socioeconomic registries in Denmark. For example, we have individual level information on income actually every year, so we can follow also income throughout the year, so we can adjust for income. We also have yearly information on your highest attained education, on your cohabiting status, on your occupation, on your ethnicity. So all the results I will show will be also adjusted for socioeconomic status. We estimated noise using the Nordic prediction method, which is a method that you've also used for many years in Denmark. And just briefly, input variables are, of course, all the geocodes and also height. So we estimated noise at the level you live in. So if you lived on the 3rd floor, we estimated noise at the 3rd floor. We included, of course, screening from buildings, from noise barriers, from terrain. You can actually see how it actually looks in this sound plane where we estimated noise. So this is a city in Denmark where you can see in blue all the buildings, building polygons, and in red here you can then see all the roads, and for all the roads we had information on all this. So the traffic composition, how many heavy, how many light vehicles were on the street. We had information on how much traffic were on the street, so yearly average daily traffic, the speed on the road, and also the road type. And that resulted in that we received this one, LDEN, kind of an average of noise over the entire day and night. So this is how a noise map of Denmark then looks. It's made by Jesse, who is here, and you will see a lot of results that Jesse actually did. So if you have a lot of nasty questions, then please ask Jesse for them. But Jesse made this map of Denmark, so kind of giving all the addresses that we estimated noise from a color. So, but to translate it into something more easily interpretable, we actually in our study found that this distribution, and which can relate to that we had more than, or 50% that were exposed to more than 57 decibels. And as the ones that really listened at my first slides will say, well, in Denmark you had these 28% exposed to more than 58. So this is much more, and I can tell you why we find much more, because this is the Danish EPA's map. So this is the mapping that are sent to EU. So this is kind of the basis for EU's calculation of how many people are exposed in EU. According to this EU mapping, you only need to estimate noise at large agglomerations, which in Denmark are 4 cities. It's Copenhagen, Odense, Aalborg, and Aarhus. And then on this large roads, the state roads. So this means that in Denmark, what we send to EU is this, and this is how it's actually looking. So just for you to know that we find a bit more people exposed when we actually estimate at all addresses. We estimated noise as both the most and least exposed facade. You can say basically all research are done on noise on the most exposed facade, so kind of the facade of your building facing a busy street. But we thought also it could be really interesting to look at noise at the least exposed facade, because if you have the possibility to actually choose a bedroom facing away from a busy street, this would what most people would actually choose to do. So we see it kind of a proxy for sleep. And this is a map of Denmark. Here you see the most exposed facade, and here you see the least exposed facade. And what you can see is actually that central Copenhagen gets really silent when we talk about this least exposed facade. And I'm sure many of you have been in Copenhagen, and there we have a lot of these closed courtyards where actually noise are not allowed to slip in. So therefore there's at least not traffic noise. We know that there are a lot of other sources to noise in these closed courtyards, but there are no traffic noise. So we then, we now have information on noise, on socioeconomic, and we then found out who actually developed the diseases we wanted to look at. So this is just basically for you to see how many cases we actually have on our studies. So those of you who are used to looking at risk rate confidence interval, we'll see we have very narrow confidence interval because, for example, for ischemic heart disease, we have more than 100,000 persons that actually develop the disease, and diabetes, we have even more. So to the results for cardiovascular disease and diabetes first. I will show all results as these figures, exposure response figures. So I will start by going through this really detailed so you know how to read all of the next figures. So basically on the x-axis here we have road traffic noise, and we work with these running 10-year averages, so the exposure during the last 10 years. And in our noise estimation, we have estimated noise from around 35 decibel. We say that this is kind of the lowest noise we can estimate, up to around 80 decibel. And up here you then see the risk for ischemic heart disease. And in pink here you see noise at the most exposed facade. And in blue you see them at the least exposed facade, and here you see the corresponding risk estimate. So if we, for example, look at the most exposed facade here, this risk estimate can be interpreted as a 5% increase in risk per 10 dB higher noise. So for example, if you move from 50 decibel to 60 decibel, you will have a 5% higher risk of actually getting ischemic heart disease. And you can see we find relatively similar risk estimates for the most and least exposed facade, which kind of indicates that both noise at that stresses us, but also the noise during sleep are important, but they seem to be kind of equally important. For heart failure, we also find an increase in risk. Here it's a 4% increase in risk per 10 dB increase in road traffic noise. Here is the most exposed facade, and as you can see for the least exposed facade, kind of our indicator for what are you exposed during nighttime, we see a higher risk, so a 9% increase in risk of heart failure per 10 dB increase in road traffic noise, which indicates that sleep is really important mechanisms in relation to developing a heart failure. What is really important to notice on this figure is that, for example, it's most clear here, we actually don't see any lower threshold. Right now, as you recall, EU only estimates noise from here and up. So they are not interested in what's happening down here, but what we can see both here but also here is that we see effects of noise at lower levels than these current guideline limits. I don't know what the Swedish level is, but in Denmark we have these 58 decibels, and it's for sure that there are no magical limit around there. Diabetes. Results here, again we see associations both at the most and at the least exposed facade. We see stronger association with the least exposed facade, a 9% increase in risk of type 2 diabetes per 10 dB increase in road traffic noise. And this is actually what we would expect, and it's always nice to see what you expect again, because we know that sleep has such a strong impact on our risk for diabetes. So it supports this very well. Again, you can see no magical threshold anywhere here. So we also looked, as Christopher said, we try to look at, you can say, new adverse health outcome in a noise context. And this included cancer. As I said, I'm working on the Danish Cancer Society, so we're of course especially interested in cancer. So when we were starting to look at this, we kind of said, is there anything in the literature that is backing up that noise is a risk factor for cancer? Or is anyone know anything about it? And yes, the new president-elect in the US actually said that noise was causing cancer. And this is actually a picture from his last presidential period. So for a long time, apparently Trump knew that noise were causing cancer, but we thought maybe it's a good idea just to check it. So we did this study on breast cancer. Here we, of course, focused on looking on women. And first we looked at noise here at the most exposed facade. It's again, I know it looks a bit different, but it's still these exposure response. We have noise here risk here. And what we saw was not really convincing, a 1% increase in risk per 10 dB, but there seemed to be something here at the highest levels. But when we then looked at noise at the least exposed facade, we saw a stronger risk estimate, a 3% increase in risk, and a really clear dose-response relationship here at higher levels, indicating that noise is a risk factor for breast cancer, and again, it seems to go mainly through the effects during nighttime. We also looked at dementia. Yeah, I would love to take questions, but I'm sure Christopher will say that this is not allowed. But there will be time for questions later on. So for dementia, again, we saw strong associations both with noise at the most exposed facade, at the least exposed facade, no lower thresholds, and stronger associations again with noise at the least exposed facade, indicating that it's this effect during nighttime that is particularly important. So to the conclusions. So right now, as you recall in the WHO report, it was concluded that it's only ischemic heart disease that are associated with road traffic noise. But in my evaluation, we need to look deeper now because there's been a lot of studies showing also an effect on stroke and heart failure. So I think we can also say now that road traffic noise is a risk factor for stroke and heart failure. There's also a lot of studies now on diabetes, so I think it's safe to say also now that noise is a risk factor for type 2 diabetes. Then there are a lot of these studies, there are studies showing associations with other outcomes like overweight. I showed you the result for breast cancer and dementia. We actually also found associations with infertility and tinnitus, and there's been other studies showing associations with, for example, depression, reading comprehension in children. So this is where we need to kind of focus research on in the future to see whether this is also associated with noise. So I think some really important discussions we need to take in the future is what is the lower harmful threshold for road traffic noise, because this is very influential on when we kind of estimate the health impact. So how many people are actually being sick of their exposure to noise. This is very important where you actually set the threshold. Do you start to calculate from 55 as the EU does when it calculates, or do we start lower, which our results clearly indicate? So if we start, for example, for 45, we'll find a lot of additional cases, which is of course important when we need to advise the politicians on whether this is a good idea to focus on. And then again, also which diseases to include. You may recall that in the WHO report, they only looked at this ischemic heart disease, and this is reflected kind of in the 2020 report from the European Environment Agency, where they only included ischemic heart disease. But as you saw on the last slide, I recommend that we include other cardiovascular diseases. We also include diabetes, which will make these numbers much higher. Yeah, so I can see Christopher is already standing there. So I will say thank you very much.